first Grand Slam final here at Wimbledon. Has it made you hungry for more?
Absolutely not. I'm so tired, honestly. You know, myself, my team, I think we're all exhausted. You know, we played so much tennis. But I definitely need a well-earned vacation after this one.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And he may have lost the final, but the Kyrgios show has again delivered for the media, with endless stories of the good, the bad and the ugly. The UK Telegraph calling Kyrgios' place in the final Wimbledon's worst nightmare, and adding,
"Truly, he makes John McEnroe look like a King's College choir master."
Also jumping on board the Kyrgios hate train was Piers Morgan.
Can you put up any defence for this Antipodean monster?
Piers, there's plenty of Australians who think he's an absolute tool as well.
While one columnist in the Sydney Morning Herald went so far as to call for his deportation.
Is there a way to revoke Nick Kyrgios' Australian passport and kick him off the island so we can stop being linked to this grub?
Charming. But ahead of his first Grand Slam final, it was the Saturday telly that nailed the national mood.
Memo to Kyrgios: don't be a dickhead out there.
So, did Kyrgios silence his media critics in going down in 4 sets against one of the game's all-time greats? Well, no. While plenty of commentators praised his tennis, there was a whole new round of commentary about how he lost the war against himself.
If Wimbledon allowed entry music, Nick Kyrgios might have chosen Paul Kelly's signature tune. He's most definitely done all the dumb things.
Or as the Age's Greg Baum summed it up,
"So 2 cheers to Kyrgios for his Wimbledon. The sheer genius of his tennis gets him to 2. It can never be 3, should never be 3, for a so-called sportsman who routinely abuses officials and volunteers as part of his shtick."
And what did the British tabloids think of the show? Well, spare a thought for George, screamed the Sun.
Swear to the throne.
George left shocked after Kyrgios drops F-bomb during Wimbledon final.
But now, to courts of a different sort, and a case involving the scandalous death of patients at Chelmsford Private Hospital in the 1970s, where there has been a legal upset that will make your head spin. Back in November 2020, we told you of a famous win for the media after the federal court delivered a victory to ABC journalist Steve Cannane and publisher HarperCollins over their 2016 book Fair Game. That verdict came after 3 years and millions of dollars in a defamation case brought by 2 Chelmsford doctors, and Cannane told us it was a real victory for truth.
When we found out, it was a great feeling. This was such an important case. We knew it meant a lot to not just us, but to a lot of other people as well. The victims of Chelmsford, journalists, publishers. It was real victory for truth, for a great publisher standing up for itself and for its author as well, but also the victims of Chelmsford, and also a great victory against people who are trying to rewrite history.
But wind the clock forward and total victory has turned into absolute defeat.
Chelmsford doctor wins appeal over defamation decision.
In April, the full bench of the federal court savaged the original judgment and ruled that 2 deep sleep doctors at Chelmsford, John Gill and John Heron, who died last year, were defamed by Cannane, and that 2 of his defences of truth and qualified privilege had failed. So, how has it all been overturned? Gill and Heron claimed that Cannane's book defamed them by saying they had falsified death certificates, were medically negligent, and had caused the death of patients with their use of deep sleep therapy at the notorious Chelmsford Psychiatric Hospital in the 1970s. Cannane countered that his book was about Scientology, and he'd only mentioned Gill in 1 sentence in 1 chapter about Scientology's role in exposing what happened at Chelmsford. And he told Media Watch,
So my book, and even this chapter, really wasn't about Chelmsford. But in writing that chapter, I had to refer to what happened there. And to write that, I referred to the Royal Commission findings. And so what this defamation case was about was them trying to overturn established facts and findings from that Royal Commission.
And that was certainly the view of the trial judge. Justice Jane Jago found that Gill and Heron were fixed on trying to
rewrite history and vindicate their conduct, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary and the lack of any cogent evidence to support them.
Cannane's chapter on Chelmsford relied heavily on the findings of the 1990 Royal Commission, which had publicly damned Gill and Heron and shredded the doctor's reputation. Cannane's defence did the same, and Justice Jago accepted the argument, finding
Mr Cannane was entitled to treat these sources of information as authoritative and unimpeachable.
But on appeal, the full bench of the federal court has taken the opposite view. with Justices Michael Lee, Michael Wigney and Stephen Rares finding that
the reports of 4 doctors that had been tendered at the Royal Commission but not tested by cross-examination at the time should not have been admitted in evidence in the defamation case as part of HarperCollins' truth defence because the experts were dead and could not be questioned in court.
And having concluded that Justice Jago had relied on those reports in giving victory to Cannane, the appeal judges ordered a retrial of
Cannane and HarperCollins' truth defence in relation to 8 defamatory meanings Gill said the book conveyed about him, 7 of which Jago had found were not conveyed. The appeal court said those 7 meanings were in fact conveyed.
So, after 5 years, it's back to square one, and the battle will have to be fought again, if the publisher or its insurers have the stomach for it. But this time, with Cannane severely hobbled, because the appeal court has ruled that Cannane did defame the doctors and has ruled out one of his defences of qualified privilege. That's because the judges found Cannane had failed to act reasonably in not approaching the doctors for comment. Cannane had not done so, he told the court, because he had zero confidence that their side of the story would be truthful. And Justice Jago had agreed, finding
this was a rare case in which it was simply unnecessary to give the applicants any further opportunity to attempt to rewrite history.
But again, the appeal judges have overruled her, decreeing that
none of the explanations given by Mr Cannane absolved him from obtaining and including at least some reference to Mr Heron's and Dr Gill's response or side of the story as part of his narrative about the goings-on at Chelmsford Private Hospital.
So, what does this about-face mean for journalists and publishers? Well, to me, it's a massive blow to freedom of speech. First, it shows that defending a defamation case in court is ridiculously hard. Second, it shows you can't rely on experts who have died or can't give evidence. Third, it shows that a court won't accept the findings of a Royal Commission as established facts. Yes, really. As defamation expert Dr Matt Collins QC told me to watch.
However distinguished a Royal Commission may be, experience has shown that clear or conclusive findings that one makes often are not vindicated in subsequent judicial proceedings, whether criminal or civil.
And finally, it is a reminder to always, always, always seek comment from someone if you're potentially defaming them and if you don't want to lose a key defence. Much has been made about how changes to the defamation law in Australia will soon make life easier for public interest journalism. This appeal decision suggests we should not get too excited about that prospect. In fact, you wonder why any investigative journalist would ever write a book again, or why any publisher would publish it. Such are the risks. Cannane told us from London.
It's been a very difficult, draining and expensive exercise. And although I want to fight this all the way, there are many things to consider, including the victims and their surviving relatives.
Some of whom would, of course, have to give evidence all over again. Meantime, Dr Gill welcomed the appeal decision. He said it marked another step in his fight to seek justice, and he is looking forward to completing the next stage of the legal process. But now to the much happier end of another legal saga involving a celebrated whistleblower.
They were never going to give up in the fight to stop the prosecution of Bernard Collaery and his former client, Witness K.
Today I have discontinued the prosecution of Mr Bernard Collaery under Section 71 of the Judiciary Act 1903.
After more than 50 court hearings, $4 million in legal costs and 4 years of legal argument, the Australian government's top secret case against a former ACT Attorney-General has been dropped. 77-year-old lawyer Bernard Collaery had been facing the threat of jail on charges of conspiring with his client, a former senior intelligence agent known only as Witness K, to reveal dirty government secrets from almost 20 years ago.
The agent wanted an investigation into allegations Australian spies had bugged the Timorese cabinet in 2004, allegedly to gain an upper hand in negotiations over massive undersea oil and gas reserves. Collaery was called to give confidential evidence at an international court in The Hague, but was stopped from leaving the country. Later, he and Witness K were charged under the Intelligence Services Act.
It was, as top silk Geoffrey Watson SC said last week, a dark chapter in Australian foreign relations.
I just think it was one of the most disgraceful moments in Australia's conduct of international affairs since the Second World War. We should be ashamed of what occurred, and we should be doing whatever we can to make amends.
It was also a dark chapter for press freedom and our treatment of whistleblowers. While Witness K escaped jail with a 3-month suspended sentence after pleading guilty last year, the pursuit of his lawyer continued without mercy. As a bewildered Collaery told us back in 2020,
It's a bad dream. It's ruined my practice and everything I've worked for. Be different if I felt that I'd done something wrong. It's sheer, unadulterated, vindictive injustice as far as I'm concerned.
The Morrison government and its Attorney-General Christian Porter, who had to approve the prosecution in the first place, not only refused to drop the charges, but insisted the case be heard in secret, seemingly to avoid political embarrassment over negotiations led by former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer almost 20 years ago. And the prosecution had continued despite a chorus of condemnation.
It was very difficult to see how the public interest would be served by prosecuting somebody in his position for offences of this kind.
So why has the case now been dropped? Simply a new government in Canberra with nothing to hide. Or, as Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus put it on Thursday,
all prosecutions involve a balancing of interests. The balance of interests can change over time, and this is such a case.
Collaery is enjoying time overseas and was not available to chat. But he said in a statement,
"This decision will allow me to move forward with my life and legal practice."
And that is certainly something Collaery deserves. Which leaves just one aspect of the whole sorry saga remaining.
The question now is whether at least some of the material the former government had hoped to keep secret may finally be revealed. But the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, was clear about one thing.
This government remains steadfast in our commitment to keep Australians safe by keeping secrets out of the wrong hands.
Now, that may not dampen calls for a full inquiry into how Australia treated its Timorese friends, but it's a clear sign the government has no intention of granting one. And finally to London, which was on tenterhooks last Wednesday as TV crews camped outside 10 Downing Street to see if Prime Minister Boris Johnson would throw in the towel.
Have you asked him to resign, Larry?
In the end, Larry the cat was almost alone in staying loyal to his master, as more than 50 ministers, including the Chancellor and Health Secretary, and scores of Tory MPs abandoned their embattled leader.
Sajid Javid has resigned.
I think Rishi Sunak has just resigned.
Just hearing that there's been another resignation. Let me just check who it is. Laura Trott.
And as the evening wore on, the defections kept on coming.
3 more resignations, 5 ministerial resignations, all in one fell swoop. We can't keep up. As we talk, another one has gone.
So many were there, and so fast did they come, that Sky News UK kept a running tally up on the screen. BBC Newsnight, meanwhile, signed off with an honour roll to a tune of bitter-sweet symphony, listing ministerial casualties of the conflict. And naturally, the front pages had joined the chorus with headlines like these.
Finally!
Curtains for Bozo!
Get exit done, Boris.
It was a crazy day in a crazy week. And topping it all was Piers Morgan, who opened his show with Boris the Pig.
Tonight, Boris Johnson must go. The greased piglet of politics has slipped and squirmed through almost 3 disastrous years of disorder and deceit. 38 resignations in 2 days have butchered his government, and tonight, surely, nothing can now save his bacon.
Most would have agreed, but Boris had told his party and Parliament that day he had no intention of going.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
Frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
And sure enough, come Thursday morning, despite the mass defections, Boris was still hanging on, and the Sun was repeating the message he had given to Tory MPs.
You'll have to dip your hands in blood to get rid of me.
Johnson had been carrying a target on his back for months, yet he sailed on as scandal after scandal unfolded and lie after lie was laid bare. So how had he managed it? Veteran political journalist Peter Oborne, author of The Assault on Truth, says Boris had powerful friends to thank, arguing that he rose to office and rode out the storms thanks to support from rich Conservative Party donors and 3 big media groups.
Murdoch, Associated Newspapers, Telegraph, 3 big groups which control about something like 70 to 80% of the newspaper reading market. They all backed Johnson to become Tory leader. They all backed him to become Prime Minister, and they all backed him in his moment of crisis, without exception, absolutely crucial to his success.
But by last week, almost all had deserted him, although the Daily Mail was still banging his drum with editorials like this on Monday and this last hurrah on Thursday morning.
The truth is, Mr Johnson still stands head and shoulders above any of his would-be assassins.
But its pleas counted for naught, as a few hours later, Boris finally bowed to the inevitable and resigned.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
Outside Downing Street, there were celebrations as he made his speech.
The party's over.
And even in his own seat of Uxbridge, many reckoned it was good riddance.
Massively relieved. It's been such an embarrassment having him as our Prime Minister.
I've just heard the speech and I think it was absolutely abysmal. There's no sorry, no nothing.
The Economist magazine also shed no tears, waving him off with this one-word headline on its cover.
Clown fall.
And that's all from us for tonight. You can read full statements from Steve Cannane and media lawyers Matt Collins and Malia Saunders, and a link to both judgments on our website. And don't forget, Media Bites every Thursday. Until next week, goodbye.